Tips Analysis.
I hope you're feeling positive because this is the Introverted Positron, and welcome back to another episode of Tips Analysis. Today I want to talk about a topic that was actually suggested to me by a friend, somebody who has been on this channel before in a few Let's Plays and whatnot, and that is Phil. And he had an idea for a discussion that I could talk about, and it's a pretty good idea in my opinion. So what we're going to be focusing on for today is we're going to be talking about lore in video games. So mostly the questions I want to answer are, is it possible to have too much lore? Does lore actually add anything to a game in general? Does it affect how much you enjoy a game? Does a game need lore to be enjoyable? So on and so forth. So let's get into it. Lore is an interesting subject when it comes to video games in general. Generally speaking, if you're not sure what lore exactly is, it's basically like stories to the world and characters that kind of build up the game a bit. And to be honest, they can bring quite a bit of enjoyment to a game. For instance, Legend of Zelda is a series that has a lot of lore to it. A lot of inconsistent lore, but a lot of lore to it nonetheless, and it's stuff that the fans love talking about. It's something that everybody looks forward to with new games, is what new lore comes out, as well as, of course, the gameplay, but lore is a big part of what people are looking for as well. And it's because it's just such an expansive universe and an expansive array of options and characters that they get to explore and how those characters work. And that's kind of cool. It's something that we get to enjoy looking forward to, and that's something that really adds to the game. And there are games that are even more lore based than Zelda, of course, way more lore based than Zelda. So Zelda's pretty minor when you consider it. So, for instance, Dark Souls. Dark Souls is a game that really is very, very highly lore based. Like, the actual base of its story is in its items. If you read through item menus and item descriptions, you can actually figure more out about the world and the people that lived in it and live in it, and about the history of that world and why it's in the state that it's in now. And it's pretty cool. I didn't do enough of that when I was playing through the game myself as a Let's Play, mostly because I was Let's Playing and I wasn't going to spend hours in that time reading it, although if I'd known more about that beforehand, I might have done it in my spare time. But the point is that it's an interesting thing to just add to what you're doing and add to the idea of the game, because it explains what it means to be the... Oh wow, this is bad. Not gonna get into that, but it explains what your main character really is in those games and what can happen and why you're doing what you're doing, because there's a lot to it, and I don't want to get too much into it because I don't want to spoil the game either, but it's really cool if you look into it. And then there's also other games like Skyrim, which also have an incredibly in-depth lore, and all of that's really interesting. Like, there's tons of books to read in Skyrim, there's tons of books outside of Skyrim to read, and what it does is it builds a world. Like, for instance, if you know Lord of the Rings and J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote those books, he actually wrote a bunch of notes before he wrote them, which was made into the Silmarillion. And the Silmarillion is basically a description of the lore of Middle-earth. So the whole point of it is that he used that base to build a world around what he wanted his story to be. So he built the world so he could write his story and make it more believable, more like there's a lot more to it than just the straight path that he's drawn from the Shire to... I'm forgetting things today. To the end point where Frodo destroys the ring, and it's really cool. It adds a lot to the story when you look through it, because it also is what creates a living, breathing world, because it's one that's created for more than just the purpose of the story, but is a world in and of itself, and the story happens within it. So in and of itself, as a storytelling tool, it's really interesting. Also, as a world building tool, it's really cool because, for instance, if they built the lore in Skyrim before they built the game, then it means that their structures and what they build and where things are have more to do with the lore than they do with everything else, in which case they almost feel more like a natural position. So lore in and of itself can actually help to build up a game because it can be used as a source for where things are coming from, and that's a really cool idea. It's interesting because it creates a more believable world, it creates a world that you can really get into. It's a world that you can actually enjoy and you can kind of look more into if you have the time and want to, and those things are really interesting. Now, the question of course is it possible for there to be too much? And I think it depends on your point of view, honestly, in this case. I would say yes to an extent. and I mean that as somebody who really likes looking into lore. It's possible to have too much lore in the system where it's like impossible to sort through all the events that make sense to add into your story. And it's because there's people who have spent hours upon hours upon hours building up this world, and basically you would need several books to actually read through to understand where they're coming from. And there's stuff like that. I believe The Witcher 3 is actually to that extent, where the books for the series, I think I've heard this correctly, actually add to the story of the games. And I think that might be good for some of the really hardcore fans who enjoy reading into those things, who enjoy looking through those books and reading them and going out of their way to go past everything else and just enjoy the series in general. And that's cool. I actually really think it's a great idea for a game. But ultimately, I think it can be a little bit too much for people who also want to go into that, especially if they want to look through it and want to be able to really understand the world. It can be almost too much at times. And maybe. At the same time, I think there are also a lot of people who enjoy having that much content. I know for myself personally, a lot of people don't like really complicated styles of gameplay, and I think as long as it's not convoluted, I actually really like really complicated systems. That's why I enjoy Xenoblade Chronicles 2 as much as I do, is because its system, although not incredibly complicated, is complicated enough that I can kind of just like enjoy learning the little bits and pieces as I play through, and that's for me personally. So I imagine, even though I don't necessarily like to have like so much lore that it's hard for me to sort through everything if I want to actually go through it, I imagine there are lots of people who also like to just have a huge amount of reading to do to understand the game that they're playing to an even wider extent. So lore is a really cool device in games. And honestly, I wish I could go more into it. I might actually save this for a later discussion and more go into like examples and stuff. Actually, I can't think of one example of that happening outside of like Skyrim and stuff, but Zelda actually does that. Breath of the Wild does that because of its guardian placements and stuff. So because of the fact that it's a ruined world, you can actually pay attention to where guardians are, and that will almost be like a sign of where like great battles happened. In fact, I think one of the labyrinths in the game is actually where the final battle happened before basically everybody was wiped out. But it's really, really cool. When you start looking into placements like that, and the fact that they thought about, okay, we want this place to be this, we want this to be that, and they built it around a lore of the world that they had developed over that 100-year period, and it helps to build the game. It helps to make the world and the battles that happen feel more believable. And so, in conclusion, lore can be something that's really interesting, something that can really build a believable world, but it can also kind of be too much. It can be too much for you to look into to really understand. So, I think that's pretty much all I need to talk about here. I hope you enjoyed this little discussion. I certainly did. I want to go more into this kind of stuff as we go on. As so far, it's been mostly specific game related, but I like talking more about these more general topics. And I want to do more research for them in the future, but this I enjoy talking about. So I will see you soon. Bye. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps with the channel, and it's always appreciated. I'm going to leave some links here so you can go check out some other stuff on my channel, or you can always just search the channel. There's lots of stuff for people, playlists, and all that stuff. And so on that note, thank you again. Have a great day, and remember to keep positive.